And now we would like to start with the curator and artist talk. And once again, we are very happy, now I get words for it, to have you, the curators and artists with us here today. So a warm hello and welcome to everybody again. So let us introduce the participants. Kiri Dalena is a visual artist and filmmaker. Dalena is known for her artistic work that exposes social inequalities and injustices, particularly in the Philippines. Her active commitment to upholding human rights in the middle of state prosecution is the basis for her artistic practice, which highlights the importance of protest and civil disobedience in today's society.
And I'd like to introduce Sandrine Colard. Sandrine Colard is an historian and curator for modern and contemporary African art and photography based in Brussels and New York City. Her recent exhibitions include The Way She Looks at the Walter Collection, Congoville at the Middelheim Museum in Antwerp, and she also curated the 6th Lubumbashi Biennial. Collard's research has been supported by numerous grants, including of the Musée du Quai Branly and the Ford Foundation. Welcome, Sandrine.
And last but not least, the informal curators of the Rautenstrauch-Joest-Museum. They are activists, psychologists, researchers, artists, and social and cultural workers. So I would say they are kind of a group, correct me afterwards if I'm not right, which came together in 2021 around Yasmine Eid-Sabbagh's project from the series Artist Meets Archive, namely Rautenstrauch-Joest's Katze. Rautenstrauch-Joest's cat, which was also dealing with about questions about the museum's photographic archive. So the informal curators of the Rautenstrauch-Joest-Museum exists to this day, I would say maybe in different formats, but I don't want to tell too much about them. So I think they should, let's speak them themselves. They should speak for themselves. So now I would hand over to my colleague Lucia, and she will ask you the first question.
Sandrine, I would like to ask you the first question. So in your concept for the Undisciplined show, you formulate the very interesting idea that these images we are talking about, images from colonial contexts, have just not managed to manifest rigid categorizations. Can you explain this briefly to us?
Yes, thank you for the question, Lucia. And I'm also very, very happy to be here with all these great curators. And it's a real pleasure to be able to keep the things going in spite of it all. So thank you for that. And of course, I was talking specifically about ethnographic and colonial photographic archives, such as the one we have here in the museum. I think you mentioned 100,000 photographic objects in the museum. So we understand how huge these collections are, and we can imagine on on a global scale what the number of images is. So of course, these images are extremely heterogeneous. And I think it's something important to remind people that when we speak about these collections, we speak about a vast variety of images. Ethnographic images can be photography of artifacts, of scenes, dance, rituals, same thing for colonial photography. But of course, when we talk about ethnographic collection, usually people associate it with photographic captures of non-white people, turned into objects of study, of scientific, quote unquote, scientific object. And, and of course, that's what we call physical anthropology photographs, or in its most invasive form, anthropometric photography. And I think that we do not repeat enough how these are failed sciences and failed photographs in their initial intention, for all the damage that these images have done in creating stereotypes and presenting, because my field of expertise in Africa, in creating this image of African people as being the absolute other, I think we do not repeat enough that they have failed to prove that different races exist, that the shape of a skull demonstrates the inferiority of a person, or that by taking one person from a so-called tribe, you can have elements that apply to a whole group of people. So, I think it's interesting because we keep calling them ethnographic, photography. We keep, caring for them, preserving them, very rarely questioning, the very way they arrive into the museum, and how we keep calling them as if they still have scientific validity, or as if this appellation was unproblematic. So that's really what I meant by, the fact that these are failed images. I mean, in their initial intention, that's what I meant. And a historian that I really admire, Patricia Hayes, who's a historian of photography, a South African historian, in her latest book, Ambivalent, talks about how we should really rethink how we speak about these images, how they are labeled, how, in which drawer they are in the museums, how this is really something that we need to do fundamentally, and not thinking afterwards what we need to do with them, but really how they arrive. So I guess that's what I meant by undisciplined, to show how undisciplined ethnography is, how we need to decouple these images from the scientific posture that they claim to have.
Yeah, thank you for your thoughts. And I also think it's interesting that you focus on not only the content and the images, but also the structure, the infrastructure, like archiving and distributing, labeling. Yeah. So what do you think in the end, what power do images have in your opinion?
I think anyone who's been living through the 20th century do not need to know. I mean, they are so widespread, prevalent, nonstop, that it's double-edged, because we don't even realize that they surround us, images. And so we assume we are literate about images because they're ever present. And I think that's probably where their power lies, that they're so ubiquitous that we no longer think about them. And we really need, the same way we teach children to be literate about words, we really need to, children and people in general to be literate about images, which is probably, a vocabulary that's much, much more used than words. So yeah, I think that the power of images is just self-explanatory. We don't really need it.
So I would like to go on with the next question, and this one would be for Kiri. So Kiri, it all started with the exhibition Resist, as Nanette said before, and this is almost 1.5 years ago. So could you briefly tell us about the process and the relationship between you and the 3,781 photographs from the Philippines of our photographic collection?
Hi, Caro. I'm very happy to have that 1.5 years to process the images, and I felt that the term process is really exact, in the sense that when I was first invited to work remotely on the archive, it was all new to me. The names, these figures, Dean Wooster, Georg Lawson, and the context as well as of the images. So I plunged into so much reading first and researching. In fact, I remember the requirements in the beginning to write about like what I was going to do was so complicated, because I needed a lot of time to process what I was seeing for the first time, and as well as seeing the photographs. I've seen the photographs in some documentaries or some exhibitions, but never in the context of how they were taken and the entire series of images. also doing this during the pandemic was quite complicated, meaning I had no access to libraries, which were closed. So it also became sort of asking people, what do they know of these photographs? What do they know of this period? What books do they have? So most of that time were spent really reading until, and re-understanding how I read pictures as well and history. So it's a difficult and painful process and experience.
Yes, I was really amazed how deeply you dived into the collection, and so that's why I would like to ask you if you think if it's possible to explore Philippine history through these colonial photos and to address the trauma of colonial oppression through an artistic process, or I would say an artistic research.
Yes, they were the photographs were triggers, and what added to the difficulty was, of course, these photographs are rare. Rare for this period in our history to be documented, and these photographs were taken by the American colonizers, which of course gave it this sense of rarity, but then understanding the context of why they were taken and how they were taken is another matter that we never really learned in school or anywhere else. So it's something as an artist, I had to study history again, and the photographs really helped me to enter into difficult routes, and realizing that there's a lot. I have taken photography for granted and historical photographs for granted, and there's also this sense of urgency I felt for us to share these photographs and the knowledge of how we read these photographs. So yes, definitely I dived into Philippine history and how this period greatly affected the institutions that we have today.
Thank you, Kiri, for your very inspiring words and work. So now I would like to ask a question to the so-called informal curators of the Rautenstrauch-Joest-Museum, because they as well dived deep into the archive, but in a completely other way than Kiri did. So, but first of all, I would like to ask you if you could briefly explain us your interesting name, Informal Curators of the Rautenstrauch-Museum, and how did your group get together, if it is a group, and what is your central concern or mission?
The question is, who is going to speak now? I will try just briefly to say something. I'm sitting in Dakar and there's elections in 2 days. So there's so much noise in the street that I'm not sure how well you will hear me, but I will try. Concerning the name Informal Curators of the Rautenstrauch-Joest-Museum and the question of the group, if we are a group, like we came together as individuals from different kind of horizons and practices, and we started or entered a conversation together around the archive of the museum in the context of the residency with the Fotoscene last year. And so we clearly didn't start off as a group, but now it has been more than a year that we have been having conversations actually about this photographic collection. And while we have very individual and different opinions on photographs, on power dynamics, etc., and bring very different experiences into the group, there is something like of group shape that has been taking shape, no, as a group, simply by passing time together, discussing and going through this process together. But yeah, we have been wondering or questioning who are we actually to, position ourselves towards this collection that has, I mean, like Kiri and Sandrine have mentioned already, like many aspects of it. Who are we to speak about this collection and to also take certain decisions? And so what position have our names? Also, given the fact that we all have names, let's say names that might be stereotyped in a context like Germany, and that are marked by different life stories and backgrounds. We were wondering if through our names we somehow also get exhibited. And so this was a long conversation that went in many different directions, but the conclusion of the conversation, because it's not that we all always agree on all decisions, but let's say the synthesis of our conversation was this name, the informal curators of the Rautenstrauch-Joest-Museum. And I think the name also carries an aspiration, which is an aspiration to the future, to actually have a name of a grouping. And this doesn't mean that the group will always be the same, but of an instance maybe that gets a place in the museum to actually participate in the debate around this photography collection. So this is one part of the response. Maybe the curators who are in Köln or on the screen want to add something.
Yeah, hello again. Perhaps I would like to add one thing. We also many times discuss is that on the one way we are invited to create something in a museum, but behind this museum and around there is a huge area called administration. And we thought also it's not, we are invited on the one way, but on the other way, we don't have the freedom to create really a counter images that we imagined before. So we have to handle with this. And in the end, we say, okay, we are curators, but not really formal. We are informal, yes, that's this thing.
Yeah, interesting point. And so I think informal curators, the term or your name fits quite well, because as you said, we invited you. So this is the first part of so you didn't like come to us and said we want to be part of this. We invited you for this, though that's not completely true. You had the claim to go further and work on with the collection after the first project, Rautenstrauch-Joest-Museum. And so this was very new for the museum as well, to have this engagement, this very strong engagement from the outside. And yeah, so I'm wondering which steps you will take next with the Rautenstrauch-Joest-Museum. And so maybe that's my question. Would you like to keep on working with the photographic collection and the museum, and let's say trying to open up the museum, not only the photographic collection? In your sense of open archive or an open archive or open museum?
I mean, let's say that we have considered this as a process since the beginning. You have been saying that this is already, or Nanette has mentioned that this is already for us kind of the second chapter, because we have been working on the collection in the context of Rautenstrauch-Joest's cat. And yes, as I just said, by creating this kind of entity, even though here it is still an informal entity, but having this aspiration of somehow interfering in certain, how would you say, processes that are part of the museum, which are the ones dealing with the photography collection, I think there is really an interest to continue and to continue working on specific parts of the collections, but also specific aspects and questions. And through this, actually extend this process that really, in the same time, also questions, the positions that actually have access to the collection, speak about it, decide how images are displayed, and that ask many questions, as Sandrine said, about the conditions in which these photographs ended up in this museum, and the conditions that contributed to certain images being displayed and how they're displayed in the museum.
So I'm very happy to hear that you could imagine to continue your work with the photographic collection. So my question would be, what in your opinion would you require? Lisa mentioned like the administrative maybe hurdles, or the like closed doors or only slightly open doors. So what would you require, or what would you wish for further cooperation with the museum, with the Rautenstrauch-Joest-Museum?
Nobody is speaking, but feel free to speak if...
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Francis. I just wanted to quickly say that I'm also part of the informal curators, and I'm of the opinion that to be able to work further on this project with the museum should really mean this, that they are ready to go to the next chapter. That's number one, because for us as Yasmine said it, we are a group of different people with different stands, but with the same vision going forward. And it will also be amazing if the museum as an institution, because someone mentioned how images are powerful. Images are like omnipresent, you don't have to say anything. The images, the historical images reflect the situation today too. Because if you look at how people perceive those images, people still see the people they see in the museums like that in the real world, because these images do not present people differently. So I would say that it goes beyond just the bureaucracy that happens in institutions. It's also the institutions also need to be very keen on wanting to move forward and wanting to let go of these images, or these images, are they playing any important role in their archives, or that would be, I think it will be very dependent on how the institution itself is willing to move, because we are ready to look into it deeper, I would say. It's just my own contribution from this part of the world. Thank you very much.
Any further comments from the informal curators on that?
No, I would like to thank the museum for its actually openness and will to engage in such a process. I don't think it's a common occurrence that one works or is invited to museum for a specific work and then is given the opportunity to continue working and to even start speaking about a longer term collaboration, which I think is a very interesting approach. And indeed, like this for me shows a certain desire, to explore new fields, let's say, because such a process of really, let's say, changing or engaging in depth insert into certain questions needs time. Yeah, I guess this is what is necessary, or the wish for time and for the possibility of process, I think, is what the desire is. Thank you.
And perhaps it's okay, I add just one thing. I think also we are now in and we don't go out. So we are also, thank you for this invitation. And I think also we are just some people, but we know other people. So perhaps we can be something like an open doors makers. So we can also bring other stories, our narrative, outside from the museum, inside. And you asking for what we wish, what we need. And I think I would like to see more curiosity perhaps about what we are doing and more space to bring it into this hall. Thank you.
So thank you for your very powerful and strong comments on this big topic of open up an archive and museum. And you mentioned a process or long-term project. So I would like to ask a question. This question goes to Kiri in terms of a process and long-term projects. So what does the future hold for you and the 3,781 photographs from the Philippines?
As similar to informal curators, the process also working with the photographs, I also came up with the need to converse, to discuss this with other Filipinos, other artists, and we also have come up with an informal entity of sorts. So the Resist project, Snare for Birds, developed into a collaboration with two other artists, a Filipino-German based in Berlin, Lisa May David, as well as a Filipino-American artist based in New York. So we've also been conversing and coming up. We turned the website into a collaboration, and we've, in fact, Lisa May David, because of this, I believe she began another initiative called Engaging Colonial Archives. And now in New York, Jacqueline is also coming up with like a zine and other ideas for us to continue this. And it really is necessary to have this openness. I do remember also treading on uncertain grounds in terms of access and also sharing this to other artists as well. It was this uncertainty, but then we realized how fortunate we were that we were working with curators who gave us access, not just with the photographic collection, but also with the objects, with the other collections. So we have proceeded to connect the photographs to the other collections, like this a real snare for birds that we found as well in the museum. And now we're also looking at exploring the Dean Wooster collection in the University of Michigan. If we've began conversations as well, because the notes about these photographs are in another institution in the US, and that's something that's in the future. So definitely this does not end here in the same way that it did not end with Resist. It continues because it's close to us and our identity and to our future. Yeah, so that's what happened in the process.
Thank you, Kiri. Yeah, and for the audience, you should all have a look at www.snareforbirds.com. This is the long-term project of Kiri Dalena, and she invited the Berlin-based artists Lisa May David and Jacqueline Rice from New York. So I would hand over the microphone to my colleague.
Sandrine, I've got another question for you. For Undisciplined, you gave us and the audience a very elaborated, a very theoretically elaborated framework. So I wondered if you had the whole museum or more space, then what artist would you have invited as well? So, or are there any works that you think that would fit in, or any artists that work with the counter image and undisciplined concept that would fit your ideas of undisciplined images? Have you any interesting artists you'd like to share with us?
Oh yes, how much time do you have? Probably one artist who comes to mind is an African-American photographer called John Edmonds. And he has a really interesting practice. He, I mean, one part of his work is to create portraits of, Afro-descendant people, African-American people, together with what we have called traditional African art objects. And it's a really interesting work because, as I was mentioning at the beginning, when we talk about colonial photography, there's a wide range of images, and one aspect of these images are images of objects, of art objects. And it's interesting to see how photography has also worked to sever African people from their objects. For instance, if you take the surrealist, in the 1930s, you had this very modernist photographs of objects with really strong shadows, completely isolated from the culture from which they initiated. So it would have been really fitting to have John Edmonds' photographs in here, because we are surrounded in the permanent collection by classical African sculpture and I think I won't speak against the museum when I say that sometimes the use of photography in this gallery is very traditional. It's used in an illustrative, unproblematized way. And I think that what's interesting with the work of John Edmonds is that he speaks precisely about how, African and African descendant people have been separated from the material culture, and that, putting them together is actually trying to reconnect them, the diaspora, but also people from the African continent. So he has these really beautiful images, and we have lots of debates about restitution of African art objects, and of course it's interesting to see how Europe and institutions in general are keen on keeping the objects, but do not want the people. They keep people at bay, the African people at bay, but they want to hold to the objects. So I think that it would have been wonderful, and who knows, maybe maybe we will have his images one day. It's one example I can think of that would have been really, really fitting into the exhibition.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that was only one example of a
large number of people who could have been in here. Yeah. Yes, but I think what I like, it's typically the sort of image that displays the type of work that displaces the way we'll look at these objects. And it's when the subtitle of Undisciplined is also disobedience. This is something that I really like, and so I think he would have been a very interesting artist to have in here.
Great. As you know, Counter Images is planned as an exhibition series, and a series that accompanies us for the next year. So who knows? Thank you. Okay, Carol.
Yeah, I think we are coming shortly to an end, but to open up the discussion at the end, I would like to ask all of you, how can we ourselves break stereotypical images in everyday life? So how can we create moments of counter images in our everyday lives? Maybe you, Sandrine, could start if you would like to.
Well, I think that probably the very first thing is to be attentive to the images of others. We have been different images are there. They have, people from all around the world, from Africa, but have created their own images. But there has been this hegemony of, images created from other parts of the world about Africa if we speak about the African continent. So I think the very first thing is to be inclusive and attentive to the millions of images, that have been created from other people. And when we talk, about inclusivity, not just in a cosmetic way, it will come naturally. There will be a balance. People will realize that colonial photography is not, the just or right representation of a continent, but we need to do that. Not just on the surface. We really need to open the door as widely as possible and really let these other voices be heard and destabilize, the museum. I remember reading a great article about museums saying that if they want to continue to exist and be relevant to the contemporary societies, they really need to be ready to be shaken up by other visions and accept that this is the only way forward. So I think it's a very it's a broad answer to your question, but I think that more than seeing only just new images, opposing, and I know that I see counter images as something that's really more than just opposing, but really having all sort of attitudes toward images, or even decide to not think they're related to you, really allowing artists and people in general how they want to deal with these images. But I think that, yes, a real, not just lip servicing inclusivity, in my opinion, will create the sort of equilibrium that we need in our representations.
Thank you for this very fruitful word, Sandrine.
Maybe I can say something to this question, to answer this question, which actually already was mentioned in all our other questions. I mean, I'm very pleased and to notice that everyone speaks about multiplying voices, somehow, or inviting others to participate in the conversation around these images and the way they're dealt with, etc. And so I think it is about this, to step out of these structures in which there's only a few deciding on how images are used, taken, preserved, disseminated, etc. So I think one way of getting out of stereotypical images is including as many as possible and as many as different voices into the conversation around images.
Thank you.
And perhaps I would add just one thing. I think the first thing that when you arrive in Germany, the first thing is that you lose your individuality. So you are a migrant, refugee, EU migrant, or something else. And it's very, very hard to come out from this and to be yourself. So perhaps we need more, let me say, discipline to see in every human really the human thing and not a group of people. So this was also our, let me say, always the conversation about, okay, we are now the people of color go into this institution to make it diverse, or we are taking part as individual. So I think it's a big question, and for everyday life, it's perhaps a first step, not to see migrants, to see a person.
Thank you, Lisa, for this powerful words. And
yes,
maybe last not, yes.
Okay, I think it has been emphasized more and more, and that there really is a need to access these photographs, and as well as to collaborate not just with artists, but a diversity of people, historians, and have discussions about the context and history of these photographs as well, because I think that access is one thing, but also the dedication to also understanding context and history is another. And this understanding, or first the interest to understand it, will only be there if you know that these photographs exist, and you know and you see them. Like I remember how we sort of came into a rough patch in the beginning about what photographs, like there were violent photographs in the Philippine collection, which resonated really deeply with me, and I wanted to go to show them, but at the same time, the implications. What are the implications of showing them, for example, releasing them on the internet, since we were web-based? So there were issues like that, which I understand has repercussions, but at the same time, so rethinking really how we share these photographs, but and at the same time, understanding that the photographs are first in Germany or in the US and not in the Philippines. So there's a lot of these issues, and so I think I'm rambling. So I think that's it. That's what I wanted to share.
Thank you, and thanks all of you for your contributions. I would like to say quickly for our audience, please visit us and visit the intervention on display here at the Rautenstrauch-Joest-Museum. The intervention is on display through May 31st. The opening hours are Tuesday through Sunday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. and Thursdays till 8 p.m. The first Thursdays a month the museum is open until 10 p.m. Mondays we are closed. And there will be a guided tour with Sandrine Colard and the informal curators tomorrow on site at the museum at 3 p.m. So you're very welcome to join us. There is also an exciting supporting program, so please check our homepage and social media channels for more information. But now, to wrap up the discussion, we also have a little special guest for tonight.
Yes, and thanks from my side as well for this very deeply and fruitful insights of your work. And for the end, we want to give a really short glimpse into Mo Laudi's work, who is part of Sandrine Colard's exhibition Undisciplined. Mo Laudi is engaging with the work of German composer, ethnomuseologist, and photographer Hans Helfrich. These photographs are from the Rautenstrauch-Joest-Museum's archive. Based on Afro-electronic music of the late 90s, a work of original compositions by Mo Laudi is created and is here in dialogue with Hans Helfrich's early works. So this allows a new perspective on the photographs, especially of Helfrich's African travels. And let me say a few words about Mo. Mo is here today, so we are very happy about that. And he just installed his art piece, so you can get a first glimpse of it tomorrow as well, if you are joining the tour. And Mo is a Paris-based artist, multidisciplinary artist, composer, DJ. So let us end this evening with Mo's piece.